All right. Thank you, Bante, for giving me the opportunity to share this sutra, which is very, very important sutra. Um, Samma Ditthi is the first step in the Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Way. And it stands for harmonious, Samma, harmonious, versus something that is in conflict. And Ditthi, which means the perspective, the angle of vision. And here on the screen, I put the image of Neo when he was offered the red pill and the blue pill. Oh, and by the way, Bante, feel free to cut me off at any time. I'm liable to talk all night.
All right.
But when Neo was faced with this dilemma, he was offered the red pill and the blue pill. The blue pill would have kept him in the matrix, which here we can think of samsara. And the red pill offered him to become aware of the matrix, which is it's akin to becoming aware of experience, which is what the matrix is made of. So I subtitled this "Taking the Red Pill" because we're going to go down the rabbit hole, if you will. So the blue pill we talked about, that's more like staying in the matrix in samsara. And samsara is the world of birth and death, the world that we're all preoccupied with, and we think that it's very serious. We all have to do things, go to work, take care of our family, and struggle to survive. And right before the Buddha awakened, that's the world, when he was Prince Siddhartha, that's the world he was a part of, the samsaric world. And upon that night where he awakened, he attained the three knowledges, and he woke up from the dream of existence. He recited two verses that are in the Dhammapada. The first verse is his account of his experience in this samsaric world, in the matrix. He said, "Through innumerable births in this vortex of samsara, did I seek the creator of this grief-ridden world. Never did I find this creator unknown. It is painful to be born again and again." This is the Dhammapada verse 153. And it shows here how he was just traveling, being born, getting old, getting sick, and dying. And this is painful. And he was looking for the creator to stop this. And just like a lot of the world, they see the creator as outside of themselves, something in the objective experience, outside, external. And a lot of the Western world thinks of it as some cosmic parent, cosmic father who created the world. And this is the type of thinking, the existential thinking that the Buddha was under before he woke up. And then in the very next verse, he explains his breakthrough, his breaking through the shell of existence. And he described it. He said, "O Creator, I have seen you. You will never create again. Your structure is dismantled, the foundation destroyed. The mind has stopped creating. The emotional urge has ceased." This is Dhammapada verse 154. And here he says he's seen the creator. He's seen the creator by looking inside rather than outside. He saw that it was his own mental activity that had created what we call the world, the self, and all the suffering in it. So this is like taking the red pill. He became aware of the matrix, this matrix that we created. We are the architect. And it is our emotional urge that is facilitating this creation over and over again. Because emotions they're never satisfied. So in order to understand reality and experience and what's happening, and get out of this existential way of thinking that we're just intrinsically here. There's an essence called Juan or Bante or Diana or Dave. Instead of thinking there's an actual thing, an entity, we have to understand what's the process. What do we call life? So life started out with atoms coming together and forming molecules. And molecules started absorbing atoms from its environment. And this was a building up process. And every time it built up, it created new molecules. And it would break down as well. So this is it was a struggle to continue. And when atoms formed into molecules, molecules got together and formed into cells. Here in the picture, we see how a cell comes together by a variety of molecules combining. And then when cells get together, they combine and become tissue. And here we see that a tissue is a community of similar cells to form body tissue. And then this building up process continued, and then tissue got together and created organs. Organs, we can think of, like here is an example of the bladder. That's an organ, and it does a specific job. But then organs started getting more and more complex. The more that life built itself up, it became systems. Systems are multiple organs working together. Like here we have the urinary tract system, where it's made up of the kidneys, the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. These are all different organs working together to function somehow in order to stay alive. And then multiple systems got together and created organisms. An organism is an organic machine, pretty much, that is made up of different systems, that are made up of different organs, that are made up of different tissue, that are made up of different cells, that are made up of different molecules, that are made up of different atoms. And then if you go even deeper into the rabbit hole, it gets even weirder with subatomic particles that we can't tell if they're a particle or a wave. But we have to understand this in order to make that jump from existential, samsaric, matrix thinking to experiential, awakened thinking. We have to understand what is happening. We can't just be under the assumption that, yeah, I'm existing here and I'm not going to ask any questions as to what's happening right now. This is what's happening right now. There's the activity of atoms, activity of molecules, activity of cells, activity of tissue, activity of organs, activity of systems, and activity of the whole organism. So this is very important to understand what is life, because life is not an existence. Life is a continuation of an activity. And then, so we are organisms in an environment. We call the human species Homo sapiens, the man that became conscious. And when the organism is born, it comes into the world with 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body. And these senses experience 3 types of feelings, 3 types of sensations. They can be either a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. Doesn't matter if it's the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, it experiences one of these 3 feelings. And whenever there is an experience of one of these 3 feelings, there's going to be an experience of one of the 3 primary emotional reactions. When there is a pleasant feeling, there's the desire, the urge for pleasure. When there's the painful feeling, there's the hatred of pain. And when there is a neutral feeling, we think that there is something there. There's an existence there. It's neither painful nor pleasant, but it's just there. Right now, I'm sitting on what I perceive as the floor. If the floor wasn't there, maybe I'd get scared, but for the most part, it's just neutral. It's a sensation, and I think it's there. But that there is just the activity happening of my nerve ends sending messages up the nervous system to the brain. And based on how I cognize, I will react, or the organism will react. So this is very important, because since we are all organisms, we all have these 5 senses, and we're all experiencing these 3 types of feelings, and we all react emotionally to each of these feelings, then our desires to attain a permanent pleasure. And if we can't attain that permanent pleasure, there's a hatred that comes up. Well, what does that mean in terms of how we're living now? It means that we're going to be coming into conflict with others to have a comfortable life. Back before there were societies, the humans were fighting each other to survive in order to get more and more supplies for living. And now we do it still, maybe not fighting, but economically, we fight to survive. And we exploit each other. So based on this sequence, there is a very big potential for conflict between oneself and others. And this is important because one of the first things we're going to learn in the Samma Ditthi Sutta, the Harmonious Perspective Sutra, the discourse, is going to be the good actions and the bad actions. Because action comes from our emotions. It is the emotion that moves us to act. And usually not in a very beneficial way, not in a skillful way, in a good way. So now we know we're organisms in an environment based on different activities of a process called life, which is a building up and breaking down process. And here we see how this process, how we might come into conflict with others because of this unconscious process that's happening. Most of us are unconscious of it, myself included, most of the time, unless I'm meditating. So I write, because of this, we begin to come in conflict with others. And this is where the question of what is good and what is bad comes in. Harmony versus conflict. If we would like to be happy, we must be free from conflict. Since we are social organisms, we must be harmonious with others if we would like to be happy. Because if we're not harmonious with others, we're going to be in conflict, and that leads to unhappiness, dukkha. Therefore, bad behavior is unbeneficial, and good behavior is beneficial for ourselves and for others. This is why they talk about the threefold training in the teachings of the Buddha, the sila, the samadhi, and the panya. Sila is the correction of the behavior, disciplining the behavior, so that we employ this knowledge, that we understand that bad behavior is unbeneficial for us and for others because it leads to unhappiness, and good behavior is beneficial for ourselves and for others because it leads to happiness. So this is very important. And what we call the mind is really just a reaction of the organism. It is an activity. There is no entity called the mind. There are 3 main activities that we call the mind. Usually if you ask someone about the mind, they'll say, yeah, that's who I am. That's the entity that I call myself. But that's silly. There is no mind. That's why in psychology, they started out by looking for the mind, the psyche, and then they couldn't find it. So then they had to study the behavior instead, because they can objectively see the behavior, but they couldn't objectively see the mind. That's because the mind is not an object, it's not an entity, it's an activity. So how does this activity come into being? It is these 3 activities, actually. 3 activities we call the mind. And the Buddha used 3 words to describe 3 different activities of the mind. So we are organisms. We have 5 senses that get stimulated. When the environment stimulates the senses, the organism reacts, and that reaction comes with a perception of the sense stimulation, perception of what is being sensed with the sense stimulation. That is called vijnana. Perception is vijnana. That's what the Buddha used. And then there is the cognitive interpretation of what was perceived. We interpret the perceptions we're perceiving about the sense stimulation, and we come up with a story. And based on that, and that's called, that thinking, that cognitive interpretation is called mano. And the Buddha famously used this word mano in his first verse of the Dhammapada when he said, mano pupangama dhamma. The thinking precedes the experience. And how does that happen? It's because when there is an emotional reaction to the cognitive interpretation, we are reacting to what we interpret, and that becomes our experience. And usually if there's an emotional reaction, then it's not a pleasant experience. So we have to understand there is no mind, there is no self. It's all in activity. We saw the activities that led to an organism, and now this is the activities within the organism that we call the mind. This is very important for us to jump from the existential, samsaric, matrix type of thinking to the experiential, awakened type of thinking. This is where we start the Samma Ditthi Sutta, the Harmonious Perspective Discourse. So the sutra starts, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. There the Venerable Sariputta addressed the bhikkhus thus. Friends, bhikkhus. Friend, they replied. The Venerable Sariputta said this. One of harmonious perspective, one of harmonious perspective is said, friends. In what way is a supernormal disciple one of harmonious perspective? Whose perspective is upright, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this real Dhamma, the experiential Dhamma, not the existential Dhamma, not the Samsaric Buddhism. Indeed, friend, we would come from far away to learn from the Venerable Sariputta the meaning of this statement. It would be good if the Venerable Sariputta would explain the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the bhikkhus will remember it. Well then, friends, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. So the Venerable Sariputta was number 2 next to the Buddha in Dhamma knowledge, in wisdom. He was the wisest of his disciples. So these monks are giddy, pretty much, to learn from the Venerable Sariputta. And here the Venerable Sariputta will go on to explain in 16 different ways that a supernormal disciple can comprehend the harmonious perspective. Because unless you understand and comprehend the harmonious perspective, you're not going towards nirvana, you're not going towards awakening, you're not going towards liberation. So it's very important. And the Venerable Sariputta makes sure these monks will understand. So we will see that the harmonious perspective is based on experiential thinking and not existential thinking. Why? Because if you ask any normal Buddhist, there's a good chance that they're going to think that Buddhism is about karma and rebirth. Yeah, there is a self, and I better do good things because I'm going to be born again, and I want to be born in a good situation, maybe in the heavenly realm or back here on earth in very pleasant circumstances where I'm rich and happy and calm. But that's not what the Proto Dhamma is. That's not what the original prototype teachings of the Buddha is. The original Dhamma, the real Dhamma, is based on experience and seeing that there is no existence. There is no, in reality, there is no karma and rebirth, although that's the normal experience of the normal human being. So we start with the good, akusala, the bad, akusala, and the good, kusala. Those are the Pali terms. Most of the time, akusala, the bad, is translated as unskillful or the unwholesome. But let's just be straight. It means the bad. It leads to a bad experience for yourself and others. And then the good is usually looked at as the skillful or the wholesome. But let's cut to the chase. It means the good, what is good for yourself and good for others. So he says, when friends, a supernormal disciple comprehends the bad and the root of the bad, and the good and the root of the good, in that way he is one of harmonious perspective, whose perspective is upright, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So here we ask, what is bad? And what is the root of the bad? Well, the Venerable Sariputta tells us here the 10 actions that are bad. Killing living beings is bad. Taking what is not given is bad. Misconduct in sensual pleasures is bad. False speech is bad. Malicious, divisive speech is bad. Harsh speech is bad. Gossip is bad. Covetousness, being jealous and lusting for what others have, is bad. Ill will is bad. And the disharmonious perspective, the perspective that brings conflict, is bad. This is called the bad. Very simple. We've heard this many times in our dwelling at the temple. We understand this, but here the Venerable Sariputta brings this up first. Why? Because we are organisms and our senses are stimulated and we experience feelings, and then the emotions react to the feelings, and this brings us into conflict with others. All these actions have the emotional reaction that motivates these actions. How do we know that? Because then we ask, what is the root of the bad? And what is the root of the bad? Lust, lobha, is the root of the bad. Hate, dosa, is the root of the bad. Delusion, moha, is the root of the bad. This is called the root of the bad. So any bad action, unskillful, unwholesome action, has the root in lust, hate, and delusion. These are the three primary emotions. And I mean, these emotions is what kept the animal alive. But once the organism evolved to the human being, to the Homo sapiens, we got a new tool. The tool was the thinking. Our brain grew beyond the other animals and where the thinking happens. And that means that we have a new tool for us to live, and we don't need these emotions to drive us, to help us survive. Then we ask, what is good? What is the root of the good? So firstly, what is good? Not killing living beings is good. Not taking what is not given is good. No misconduct and sensual pleasures is good. No false speech is good. No malicious speech is good. No harsh speech is good. No gossip is good. No covetousness is good. No ill will is good. And the harmonious perspective is good. Understanding this is good. And what is the root of the good? Well, absence of lust is the root of the good. If there is no lust, then your behavior, your thinking, your speech is going to be good. And then the absence of hate is the root of the good. If there is no hate, then your actions, your speech, and your thinking is going to be good. And the absence of delusion is the root of the good. If you don't think that you're existing, you're not just selfishly thinking, then your speech, your actions, and your thinking is going to be good. This is called the root of the good. The absence of lust, the absence of hate, the absence of delusion. So he says, when the supernormal disciple has thus comprehended the bad and the root of the bad, the good and the root of the good, he entirely eliminates the underlying tendency to passion. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He eradicates the underlying tendency to the perspective and conceit I am. And by eliminating unconsciousness and becoming fully conscious, he immediately sees and experiences the end of suffering. In that way, too, a supernormal disciple is one of harmonious perspective, whose perspective is upright, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So if someone can penetrate the matrix or reality or experience right at this step, then they reach nirvana. He says it right there. They see immediately the end of suffering. So that was the first way that someone has the harmonious perspective. Now we go to the second way. So I mentioned that usually people think of karma and rebirth. So if karma and rebirth is going to be the teachings of the Buddha, the real teachings of the Buddha, then yeah, rebirth should come second after karma, right? No, that's not what the real Dhamma is about. That's not what the experiential Buddhism is about. The next thing the Buddha wants you to see is what is fueling this activity that we personalize as existence. So if we think of karma and rebirth, we're thinking existentially. Yeah, there's something existing. But that thinking that there's something existing is a delusion. We're not seeing clearly. So here, Venerable Sariputta wants you to get the harmonious perspective. And in order to understand that, he talks about the 4 foods. That's not a typo. Ahara. And ahara, I remember Bhante Punnaji saying that that's what, in the Sinhalese language, they use the word ahara for food. So the 4 foods. And he says, when friends, a supernormal disciple comprehends the foods, the origin for the arising of the foods, the cessation of the foods, and the way leading to the cessation of the foods, in that way he is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So there are 4 kinds of foods for the maintenance of beings that already have come into being and for the support of those who are about to come into being. So there's 4 fuels, 4 foods that maintain this activity that we perceive as existence. So what is the first food? Physical food, the food that we eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks. That's physical food. Kabalikaro aharo, as a type of food, whether it's gross or subtle. That's the first thing. Remember when we saw the atoms and then the molecule started absorbing atoms from its environment, from its surroundings? That was the type of food. So the first thing of this existence is the building up process that comes from food. I mean, when we eat foods, it's no different than the molecules taking atoms from its environment and assimilating them. We're doing the same thing. It's just done through the digestive process. And then, but we're organisms, right? And we have the ability to think. We're Homo sapiens. So what's the second type of food? Cognition. The ability to interpret and form objects that we perceive and interpret. That is the second type of food. And cognition comes from the 6 senses. At first I talk about the 5 senses, but there was one sense missing, which is the thinking. All these 6 senses meet in the brain and form a cognition, an interpretation of what's happening. We interpret what is happening. That's the second type of food. If you're not seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and thinking, you're not alive. I don't think we can call you alive. But this is what cognition is. It's getting fueled by these 6 senses and meeting in the brain where it cognizes. And what's the third type of food? Thinking and emotion. So the Pali word is mano sancetana. So mano, we said, mano pupangama dhamma, thinking precedes experience. So mano is thinking. And it makes sense. We are thinking when there is a cognition. And then based on the thinking, there is a emotion. That means the mind moves, it reacts. And we can see that we like to feed our thinking and our emotion. Bhante Punaji, I remember him saying that this is why we go to the movies. This is why we go and watch dramas, comedies, horror films, sad films, love films. We're feeding the emotions. Why we watch reality TV, even reading books and listening to music. We're feeding the emotions. This is the third activity that is fueled by food. And this food is in the form of thinking and emotion. And then the fourth type of food is perception. Perception is not only perception, but Bhante Punaji used to include conception in this, because the sixth type of perception is mano vijnana. Mano, we said, is thinking, and vijnana, perception. So perception is the perception and the conception, the thinking as well as the perception. And in reality, the whole world is created by this perception. There is a sutra called the Rohitasa Sutta, where a deva, an angel or an alien, whichever you prefer, went to the Buddha and said, I have traveled at faster speed than light speed, than the speed of light, across the universe, trying to reach the end of the world so that I can become free from suffering. And can I reach the end of the world by traveling in space? And the Buddha said, well, if you want to bring suffering to an end, you do have to reach the end of the world. But not by traveling in space are you going to reach the end of the world. It is in this 6-foot-long body that there is the world, the beginning of the world, and the end of the world, with its perception and conception. So there he says, what we perceive as the world and conceive as the world is all due to this process of perceptioning happening in this organism. It's not, it sounds weird, but it's not there. I mean, to Neo, the matrix wasn't there when he finally saw through it. It wasn't there. They were just information that he was perceiving and conceiving as the world. And it's no different than what is happening now. So these four activities we personalize as me existing. This is my existence. That's why people or Buddhists think of karma and rebirth, because they're personalizing this. But here, the Venerable Sariputta is making sure you see these are activities, and these activities are being fueled because life is a building up process and a breaking down process. It's not a static existence. A static entity cannot exist in a dynamic reality that it's always changing. So this is a second way for us to break through the samsaric thinking, existential thinking. And he goes on to say, what is the origin for the arising of food? Well, he says, with the arising of emotion, there is the arising of food. So is this emotional urge that makes us feed, and it makes sense because animals survive due to the emotions, at least the mammals, and that emotion is what drives them to go eat, to go procreate, to do whatever. Emotion literally means to move, make you move, motivate you. And then he says, well, what is the cessation of food? Well, it's obvious, the cessation of emotion. With the cessation of emotion, there is the cessation of food. So if you bring an end to the emotion, then there's not a need for food anymore. And then what is the way leading to the cessation of food? The way leading to the cessation of food is the supernormal eightfold way. That is the harmonious perspective, which is the first step. Then it leads us to, once we understand the problem and the solution, we're orientated properly, which comes to harmonious orientation. And once we are oriented in the right way, then our speech, our action and our lifestyle automatically changes for the better. That's then comes the harmonious speech, the harmonious action, and the harmonious lifestyle. And once we're living harmoniously, we're going to be practicing bhavana, developing the mind. And to do this comes the harmonious exercise, which is fourfold, by guarding the senses to make sure we're not getting stimulated in a certain way that makes us emotional. And then we eliminate the thoughts, the memories, and the imagination that makes us emotional. So we guard the senses, and then we remove the memories and the imagination that brings up the emotional disturbance. And then we cultivate good thoughts, peaceful thoughts, calm thoughts. And then we maintain this wholesome, good state of mind. That's the harmonious exercise. And when you're doing that, if you're really going to do that right, then you're cultivating attention, and attention directed inside, introspection. So the harmonious exercise leads to the harmonious attention. And then that, when you're focused inside, no longer are you being stimulated by the outside and disturbed anymore. So then your mind goes into samadhi, the harmonious mental equilibrium. So this is the way that leads to the cessation of food, which leads to nirvana. And then he says, when the supernormal disciple has thus comprehended food, the origin of food, the cessation of food, and the way leading to the cessation of food, he entirely eliminates the underlying tendency to passion, to aversion, to the conceit and perspective I am. And by eliminating unconsciousness, he becomes fully conscious, and he immediately sees and experiences the end of suffering, this nirvana. This too is the way that a supernormal disciple is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So at every step, if you comprehend it, you're gonna reach nirvana. But then he goes to the third step, is the fourfold supernormal reality, normally seen as the Four Noble Truths. But noble is not the right word for Arya. The right word is supernormal, as opposed to the normal human being that is unhappy because they think they exist and they're going to get old and die. So when a supernormal disciple comprehends suffering, the origin for the arising of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the way leading to the cessation of suffering, in that way he is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So what is suffering? Well, birth involves suffering, aging involves suffering, sickness involves suffering, death involves suffering, grief, lamentation, pain, distress, and exhaustion involves suffering, meeting the unpleasant involves suffering, parting from the pleasant involves suffering, the inability to obtain what we desire involves suffering. And in short, the personalization of the process of perception involves suffering. When we personalize this process of perception, we're doomed to suffer. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is called suffering, dukkha. And then it asks, well, what is the origin for the arising of suffering? Well, it is the emotional urge, which is repetitive. Emotions are repetitive, they fuel each other, and is accompanied by delight and passion. And it delights not just in one thing, it delights in this and that and this and that. It's never satisfied. You're never, even if it rained gold, your emotions will never be satisfied. And that's built into the program into the organism by evolution, because if you have sex once and you're completely satisfied for the rest of the world, oh, that's going to ruin or hurt your chances to pass on your genes. So through evolution, the organism's programmed so that it's never satisfied by the pleasant feeling and the urge for the emotional, for the pleasant feeling. And then it says, that is the emotion. There's three emotional urges: the emotional urge for sensual pleasures, the emotional urge for existence, and the emotional urge for non-existence. This is called the origin of suffering. It is this emotional urge that makes us suffer. It's a disturbance, not just in the mind, but the whole body becomes disturbed. It becomes tense, and it doesn't reach homeostasis. It doesn't come back to a peaceful, calm state of mind until that tension is gone. And we usually try to remove the tension by going after what we desire or getting away from what we hate. But that's a unskillful way of trying to deal with this dukkha, this suffering. And what is the cessation of suffering? Well, it is the complete dispassion and cessation, the giving up, relinquishing freedom, and letting go of that emotional urge. So it's eradicating that emotional urge. That is called the cessation of suffering. When there's no more emotional disturbance, the mind and body are completely at peace, unshakable. The Buddha called this akupa ceto vimutti, the imperturbable serenity of mind. So, and what is the way leading to the cessation of suffering? It is this supernormal eightfold way: the harmonious perspective, harmonious orientation, harmonious speech, harmonious action, harmonious lifestyle, harmonious exercise, harmonious attention, and the harmonious mental equilibrium. And when a supernormal disciple has thus comprehended this, then they have reached this harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. And to understand the fourfold supernormal reality, the Four Noble Truths, we must understand the 12-fold sequence of the antecedental concurrence. That's a mouthful, but what that means is that this experience, there is a logical sequence that is happening all at once. That's why we're under the delusion that we're existing, because we don't see this sequence happening. And this 12-fold sequence is called Paticca Samupada. Paticca means antecedent, one thing happening before the other. And Samupada, meaning it's actually happening all at once. It's simultaneous. So usually we talk about the Paticca Samupada going from the bottom up. But here, the Venerable Sariputta is going to bring us from where we are and go backwards. So where are we? We're in a state where we think we're getting old and we're going to die, aging and death. So he says, and each time after the Venerable Sariputta explains a way to understand this harmonious perspective, the monks are delighted, but then they ask, is there another way that we can reach this harmonious perspective? And the Venerable Sariputta keeps feeding them. He says, when a supernormal disciple comprehends this aging and death, the origin and the cessation and the way leading to the cessation of aging and death, in that way, he is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, what is aging and death? The aging of beings, organisms in various orders of existence, their old age, brokenness of teeth, the grayness of hair, the wrinkling of the skin, the declining of the life, the weakness of their faculties. This is called aging. I mean, this is the heavenly messenger. This is one of the messengers the Buddha saw that got him to leave his luxurious life of a prince. We see this message all the time. And then what is death? The passing of beings out of the various orders of existence. They're passing away, disillusion, disappearance, dying, completion of time, dissolution of the process of perception, disintegration of the body. This is called death. And this is what we're all living. This is the matrix that we're all experiencing as real because we're deluded. This is what is aging and death. Well, what is the origin for the arising of aging and death? With the arising of birth, there comes the arising of aging and death. And what is the cessation of aging and death? Well, with the cessation of birth, there will be the cessation of aging and death. And the way leading to the cessation of aging and death is the harmonious perspective, all the 8 steps onto the harmonious mental equilibrium. So it's the supernormal eightfold way. And when the supernormal disciple comprehends this, they arrive at this real Dhamma. Well, what is birth? Then they ask, is there another way? Well, yeah, let's talk about birth. When a supernormal disciple comprehends birth, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation, then he is one who has arrived at this real Dhamma. What is birth? The birth of beings in various orders of existence. The Buddha talks about 4 different ways of birth. Through the womb, spontaneous, in moisture, and through eggs. And here it says the precipitation of the womb, in the womb, generation, manifestation of the process of perception, and obtaining the basis of cognition. This is called birth. And this is, in our situation, the human being, the Homo sapien. Well, what is the origin for the rising of birth? Well, with the rising of existence, the idea of existence, then there is the rising of birth. And what is the cessation of birth? The cessation of existence, then there comes the cessation of birth. So it's because of this idea of existence that we were born. So at the moment of death, if you still are weighed down by this idea of existence, then it creates an emotion, it creates the personalizing, it creates the idea of emotion, of existence, and that activity, that electromagnetic wave, continues. It's not an entity, it's an activity. Well, what is the way leading to the cessation of birth? Well, we're going to keep saying it until we understand it's the supernormal eightfold way. Starting from the harmonious perspective, ending in the harmonious mental equilibrium, the samadhi, Samma Samadhi. And when the supernormal disciple has understood and comprehended birth, the origin, the cessation, the way leading to the cessation of birth, he immediately sees and experiences the end of suffering, nirvana. And he has attained this harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. Then we brought up existence as this is the cause for the arising of birth. Well, when we understand existence and we comprehend the origin for the arising of existence and the cessation of existence and the way leading to cessation, then we will arrive at this harmonious perspective and arrive at this real Dhamma. Well, what is existence? The Buddha said there are these 3 kinds of existence. Sensual existence, we're experienced the senses being stimulated, the imagery or picture existence, and the imageless existence. Well, here I wrote in parentheses, emotional for the sensual existence. That's because it is through the sense stimulation that we feel these 3 types of feelings, and we react emotionally to these 3 types of feelings. So the sensual existence is an emotional existence. And then for the imagery existence, I put physical. Well, I mean, physical is just a sensation experienced through the body, the perception of the body. And this, what we call physical, is just made up of pictures in the mind. And we put these pictures together along with the sensations, other sensations, and we think there is something physical there. Even ourselves, we don't see ourselves. Only others can see us. We need to look at a mirror in order to see us. So we're looking at a picture, and we're taking not just one picture, because you can't see yourself just by one angle of vision. You have to look through different angles of vision to create this idea, this image of yourself. And that's how we create the idea of the physical, by using different images and putting them together and think, oh yeah, that's something physical. And then there's the imageless existence. Imageless is no picture. And this, our Bhante Punaji, he once explained it as, this is the mental existence. And imageless means arupa, imagery means rupa, and sensual means kama. Not the kama of action, kama with one M, that means the sensual existence. So there are these 3 kinds of existence. And it makes sense because we had 3 types of activities of the mind, right? The vijnana, the mano, and the citta. It correlates with this. Each activity creates a type of existence. Well, what is the origin for the arising of existence? Well, with the arising of personalizing, there is the arising of existence. With the cessation, what is the cessation of existence? Well, with the cessation of personalizing, there is a cessation of existence. So it's because we personalize that we think there is somebody existing. Personalized means like when we take a pen and you write your name on it, now this pen is mine, I own it. Well, that creates an idea of an existence. And what is the way leading to the cessation of existence is this supernormal eightfold way, starting with the harmonious perspective and ending with the harmonious mental equilibrium. And when a supernormal disciple has comprehended existence, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of existence, he immediately sees and experiences the end of suffering, nirvana. And he has attained the harmonious perspective, has arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, what is personalizing? We said this is the origin for the arising of existence. Well, let's talk about personalizing now. Upadana or upadana. Anytime you see that line over the A, you got to elongate it a little. And when, friends, a supernormal disciple comprehends personalizing, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of personalizing, in that way he is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real pure Dhamma. Well, what is personalizing? There are these four kinds of personalizing. Personalizing sensual pleasures, personalizing perspectives, personalizing morality, and personalizing the sense of self. So there was a great psychologist, we've all heard of him, his name is Sigmund Freud. He created the structural hypothesis of the mind. He said that the mind is made up of these three activities, the id, the ego, and the superego. Well, the id is dominated by the pleasure principle. It's always looking for pleasure and trying to get away from pain. Well, that correlates to the personalizing sensual pleasure. So Sigmund Freud, he was very, very smart for seeing this. And then he talked about the ego. He said the ego is dominated by the reality principle. It can understand reality. The id is blind. It's blind to reality. But the ego, it can understand reality. And that correlates to personalizing the perspective. So, and then he talked about the superego. What is the superego? The superego is concerned with what is good. It wants to do good. And it's always fighting with the id, the one that's dominated by the sensual, the pleasure principle. It's always trying to get sensual pleasure. But we said that if we go after sensual pleasures, then this gets us into conflict with others. So the job of the superego is to rein in that id, that blind id, id. And that correlates to the third type of personalizing morality. And then this is what Freud saw. He penetrated these three activities of personalizing. And basically, us humans, the Homo sapiens, we're fooled into personalizing these experiences as well. I mean, these activities. We think that is ourselves. The id, the ego, and the superego, that's me. That's what makes up a personality. Well, exactly, a personality is nothing but the activity of personalizing. And all the religions and psychotherapies have these three, they're conscious of these three things to a certain extent. But no other religion, no other psychology really looks at this fourth type of personalizing, which is personalizing the sense of self. In Pali, it's atta vada upadana. The personalizing sensual pleasures is kama upadana with one M, kama. The personalizing perspectives is ditthi upadana, because we're talking about the harmonious perspective here, but this is the personalizing perspectives, ditthi upadana. And then the third type is sila bhatta upadana. Sila is not to do, to refrain from doing bad things, and Bata is to do good things. So it's our sense of morality, the superego activity. But no one besides the Buddha brought up this personalizing the sense of self. Everyone else is devoted to the sense of self. They're dominated by that idea, and that's what drives them. That's why there's still emotions and led and dominated by emotions, because there is this sense of self. Until we become conscious of this, until then will we still be dominated. But if we become conscious of this, then we have a chance. And understanding this is another way to attain this harmonious perspective. And then they ask, what is the origin for the arising of personalizing? Well, with the arising of emotion, there is the arising of personalizing. And what is the cessation of personalizing? Well, with the cessation of the emotion, there is the cessation of personalizing. So it is because there's this emotional reaction that we personalize. We always say, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm lustful. Whatever it is, it's always mine. We always claim it. We claim ownership of this activity of the emotion. But this is happening mechanically. No one's doing this. It's happening to us. The emotion is unconscious. It's happening to us. But because this emotion comes up, the human organism automatically personalizes this. And it makes sense by the programming of evolution. It wants us to continue to survive and reproduce and eat, do all the things so that we continue to survive. So it wants us to think personally, that we're an existing self, and it wants us to personalize the emotions. But we don't understand this is happening automatically, mechanically. So what's the way leading to the cessation of personalizing? Well, the supernormal eightfold way is the way for the leading to the cessation of personalizing. And with this, the supernormal disciple can attain the harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So we brought up emotion as the origin for the arising of personalizing. So let's talk about the emotion now, as Venerable Sariputta did. We have to comprehend the origin for the arising of emotion, the cessation of emotion, and the way leading to the cessation of emotion in order to attain this harmonious perspective and arrive at this real Dhamma. Well, he said, Venerable Sariputta, that there are these 6 classes of emotions. There is the emotional urge for images, what we see. There's the emotional urge for sounds, what we hear. There's the emotional urge for odors, what we smell. There's the emotional urge for flavors, what we taste. And there's the emotional urge for touches, what we touch with the body. And there's the emotional urge for concepts, because we said our thinking process is a sense as well. So this emotional urge is driven to experience through the senses, all 6 senses. And that's what brings us back to samsara over and over again. As the Buddha said, being born over and over again is painful. Well, we keep coming back because of this emotional urge for this sense experience. We can't get enough of it, even though we experience not just pleasure, but pain. So it's not really us doing it. It's happening to us. It's just our job to become conscious of this. And then what is the origin for the arising of emotion? Well, with the arising of feeling, there is the arising of emotion. And what is the cessation of emotion? With the cessation of feeling, there is a cessation of emotion. So, and what is the way leading to the cessation of emotion? The way leading to the cessation of emotion is this supernormal eightfold way, starting with the harmonious perspective, ending with the harmonious mental equilibrium, Samma Samadhi. And then when a supernormal disciple comprehends this, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of emotion, he experiences the end of suffering. And this is how a supernormal disciple is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, we brought up feeling. So feeling in Pali is Vedana. And the feeling is what causes the emotional reaction, whether it's a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. And then when a supernormal disciple can comprehend the feeling, then he will arrive at this harmonious perspective and this real Dhamma. There are these 6 classes of feeling. There's the feeling derived from eye cognition, the feeling derived from ear cognition, the feeling derived from nose cognition, the feeling derived from tongue cognition, the feeling derived from body cognition, and the feeling derived from thinking cognition. So cognition, what happens is we interpret. And by interpreting, we are forming an object. The object is not there. It's a product of the nervous system, and particularly cognition. It is only through cognition that we form an object using all the 6 senses. This is why there's a feeling, and the feeling comes from cognition. Only if there is an object will there be a feeling derived from that object. And we form objects using eye cognition, ear cognition, nose cognition, tongue cognition, body cognition, and thinking cognition. We use the whole 6 senses that meet up at the brain and cognize and interprets the situation, which causes the feeling. Whether it's a pleasant, painful, or neutral feeling comes from how you cognize the situation, using the 6 senses to cognize. And what is the origin for the arising of feeling? Well, with the arising of cognition, I said, there is the arising of feeling. Feeling comes from cognition because it forms an object that makes us feel pain, pleasure, or a neutral feeling. And what is the cessation of feeling? Well, the cessation of cognition, there is the cessation of feeling. And what is the way leading to the cessation of feeling is this supernormal 8-fold way, because only by going through this 8-fold way and going into samadhi and going into the jhanas and calming your mind and cultivating your attention, purifying it, can you see this whole process that we're discussing. So this is why the 8-fold way is the way leading to the cessation of feeling and to the cessation of all suffering. And when a supernormal disciple understands this, comprehends it, then they have attained this harmonious perspective and they have arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, cognition. Let's talk about cognition. Let's learn the origin for the arising of cognition, the cessation of cognition, and the way leading to the cessation of cognition. There are these 6 classes of cognition, and we discussed. There's the eye cognition, the ear cognition, the nose cognition, the tongue cognition, the body cognition, and the thinking cognition. So we cognize using all 6 senses. We take information from all 6 senses to form an object. That's why a baby, what do the parents, what's their job the first year of a baby, taking care of a baby? It's taking things out of their mouth because they want to taste it and lick it because they're trying to, they don't know how to form objects yet. Cognition is not matured yet. So they're using all their senses to form the object. And that's why they put stuff in their mouth all the time. But we're doing this not just through the tongue, but through the ear, the eye, the nose, the whole body, and the thinking. We're using all the senses to cognize and form objects. And the baby gets trained into doing this, or it's doing this unconsciously, along with the help from the society and parents. What is the origin for the arising of cognition? Well, with the arising of the 6 sensory fields, the 6 senses, there is the arising of cognition. We kept saying this for the last 2 steps. Cognition uses the 6 senses to form the object and cognize the situation. So what is the cessation of cognition? Well, it's with the cessation of the 6 sensory fields that there is the cessation of cognition. And what is the way leading to the cessation of cognition? Well, it's this supernormal 8-fold way. We have to go through this 8-fold process to calm the mind, to become imperturbable so that we can really focus and see what is happening and see this process happening. And once we do and we comprehend cognition, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to cessation, we will immediately see and experience the end of suffering, nirvana. The 6 sensory fields, salayatana. And it says when we understand the 6 sensory fields, the origin, the cessation, the way leading to cessation, then that way he is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. So what are the 6 sensory fields? Well, there are these 6 sensory fields: the eye field, the ear field, the nose field, the tongue field, the body field, the thinking field. So it goes back to the 6 senses, because experience starts with the senses, starts with the stimulation of the senses. And we can't get away from this, because we are organisms in an environment. And it is through these 6 senses that there is sense experience. And that's what reality is based on. We can't start at existence, because that makes no sense. Existence is just a interpretation of what's happening through our senses. Experience precedes existence. Existence is a construct. So that's why there are these 6 sensory fields: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the thinking. What is the origin for the arising of these 6 sensory fields? Well, with the arising of name and image, naming and imaging, there is the arising of the 6 sensory fields. And what is the cessation of the 6 sensory fields? Well, with the cessation of name and image, there is the cessation of the 6 sensory fields. And what is the way leading to the cessation of the 6 sensory fields? The way leading to the cessation of the 6 sensory fields is the supernormal eightfold way. We got to go through the process, calm the mind, see reality, break through the matrix. And when one comprehends the 6 sensory fields, the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation, he immediately sees and experiences the end of suffering, nirvana. That way, the supernormal disciple is one of harmonious perspective and has arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, what is name and image? Nama, rupa. We have to comprehend the origin, the cessation, and the way leading to cessation in order to attain this harmonious perspective. Well, here is very interesting. The Venerable Sariputta, he first breaks down nama, the naming activity. So he said in this naming activity, there is these 5 activities: Vedana, Sanya, Cetana, Passo, and Manasikaro. So feeling, sensation, motivation, cognition, and contemplation. So Vedana, we know it's the feeling, pleasant, painful, and neutral. Sanya is the sensations, like when we open our eyes, there's a sensation of color, because light comes in a spectrum of color, and that is a sensation. And then Cetana is similar to Chitta. We said Chitta is the emotional activity of the mind. Cetana, well, when the emotion happens, it moves the mind, and that movement causes a motivation, Cetana. And that motivation is what leads to Kamma, the action. We can't act if we are not moved to act. So that's what Cetana is, the motivation. And then Passo, we just discussed, cognition is forming the object, and it's the cognitive interpretation. So it makes sense that when we are naming, this is an aspect of it. And then mana sikaro comes from mana, which is similar to mano, the thinking. And sikaro is like a way of doing it. If anyone has read the Karaniya Metta Sutta, Karaniya means what one should do. So thinking in a certain way, I chose contemplation, or we can even use consideration, using thinking in a particular way. And that's what we're doing when we're naming. We're using thinking in a certain way to name. We're identifying. And these are called naming, nama. And then when he discusses rupa, Venerable Sariputta, when he discusses rupa, he says the 4 primary elements, that means solids, liquids, heat, and motion. The 4 primary elements and the image derived from the 4 primary elements, these are called the image. So what we see, the picture, we said that there's really nothing physical. We're just using a picture to construct our idea of physical. Well, this picture is using the the sensation of solids, the sensation of liquids, the sensation of motion and heat. They're using these 4 elements to be the foundation of this image. But this image is just a construct. There is nothing physical in reality. We're just perceiving it in that way. We're seeing a picture, taking that as real. And then, so he says, this name and this image are what is called name and image, nama and rupa. So what is the origin for this, the arising of name and image? Well, you can't name the image if there is no perception. So it is with the arising of perception that there is the arising of name and image. So this perception is identifying what it is perceiving. And this name and image is being constructed, and it allows the perception to identify it, name that image that was constructed. And this is happening unconsciously, like we're not doing it, it's happening to us. And then it says, what is the cessation of name and image? The cessation of perception. With the cessation of perception, there is the cessation of name and image. So when perception ends, then the name and the image will end as well.
On.
Yes.
Let's try to wrap it up in 5 minutes.
You got it. And then we all know the way to bring this to an end is the supernormal eightfold way. And then there's perception. We got to understand perception. There's 6 types of perception: eye perception, ear perception, nose perception, tongue perception, body perception, thinking perception. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. We're using this perception to name the image that was constructed. And what's the origin for the arising of perception? Well, it is constructions. With the arising of constructions, there's the arising of perception. Remember, once the image is constructed, then the perception can name that image. And the construction is happening unconsciously. The nervous system is doing it. You're not doing it. There is no you. And then what is the cessation of perception? Well, with the cessation of constructions, there is the cessation of perception. And it is this supernormal eightfold way that leads to the cessation of perception. We have to go through this process, calm the mind and understand reality, comprehend the matrix. And then once the supernormal disciple comprehends this, then they experience the end of suffering, nirvana. They have attained the harmonious perspective and have arrived at this real Dhamma. Well, let's identify constructions, sankara. Well, there are these 3 kinds of constructions. There is the bodily construction, kaya sankara. We know kaya from kaya nupassana, the one of the types of the satipatthana, the meditation on introspection. And this bodily construction is made of in and out breathing. So breathing in and breathing out. This is the construction of the body. And then there is the verbal construction. Verbal construction is vachi sankara. That is questioning and answering. That is pretty much conceptual thinking. You don't think unless you question and then you answer. And this is very popular in the koan practice. They want you to see this verbal construction. They want you to answer this unanswerable question. And they want you to just stop this construction by running it into the ground. And then there is the mental construction, the chitta sankara, or you can even call it mano sankara. I've seen it both ways. And that is construction using feeling and sensation as the bricks. And so you see sensations through the eye, through the ear, through the nose, through the tongue, through the body. We construct using those sensations and the feelings, and we construct an image. And it is that image that the perception will then identify by naming that image and go on with the process that we've discussed thus far. What's the origin for the arising of constructions? It is unconsciousness. With unconsciousness, there is the arising of construction. So this is happening unconsciously. Remember, there was the molecules absorbing atoms from its environment. There was no one thinking, I'm going to take that atom over there looks delicious. I'm going to take that and eat it. No, this happened unconsciously. So it is through the unconscious process that the organism started constructing using these 3 types of construction. So only with the cessation of unconsciousness will there be the cessation of the constructions. And we can only reach the cessation of the constructions by going through the supernormal eightfold way. And once we do that, we will attain the supernormal harmonious perspective and arrive at this pure real Dhamma. Unconsciousness, avijja. Vijja means knowledge. We call the Buddha vijja charana sampanno, fully conscious behavior. Well, avijja is the unconscious process. The human nervous system starts constructing unconsciously. And what is unconsciousness? Well, having no knowledge about suffering, no knowledge about the origin for the arising of suffering, no knowledge about the cessation of suffering, no knowledge about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called unconsciousness. Basically, not being conscious of this 12-fold process that we call experience. This is happening to all of us at every moment. But who is conscious of this? Not many people. So we are all unconscious, and it's because of this unconsciousness that this process is happening. And what is the origin for the arising of unconsciousness? Well, it is with the arising of the influences, the environmental influences that come from outside, that there is the arising of unconsciousness. And then what is the cessation? Well, with the cessation of the emotional influences, there is the cessation of unconsciousness. And then we have to go through the eightfold way to bring this unconsciousness to an end and reach the true real Dhamma. Lastly, this is the last step, the emotional influences, asavas, asava. And what are the emotional influences? Well, Venerable Sariputta talks about 3 types of emotional influences. The emotional influence of sensual desire, kama asava. The emotional influence of existence, bhava asava, and the emotional influence of unconsciousness, avijja asava. So we're all unconscious of this process. And not only are we unconscious, we're being influenced into being desiring sensory pleasure, desiring existence, and desiring and being influenced by unconsciousness. These 3 influences are what is causing us to create the world and think that we are existing and think that we're going to get old, sick, and die and cause. This is the foundation of all suffering. Only by breaking these influences will we break through the matrix. So it's cool here because they're building each other. The unconsciousness is the reason for the arising of the influences, but that was the other way too. The influences was the reason for the unconsciousness. So we have to bring a cessation to both unconsciousness and the emotional influences in order to attain nirvana. And we can only do this by going through the eightfold way. We have to do the work. We have to walk the path. The Buddha only showed the path. The Tathagatas only point the way. We have to walk the way. And this is the supernormal eightfold way. And when someone comprehends this, they will destroy the underlying tendencies. They will destroy the influences. They will reach nirvana. This is how one is one of supernormal harmonious perspective and who has attained arrived at this real pure Dhamma. And becoming fully conscious of the matrix of experiences will be like Neo, be able to stop the influences. Those bullets are all influences that will no longer move you to react emotionally and construct the world and all the suffering. And this was a speed run of the Samma Ditthi Sutta.
understand what sort of technique